to be invited to the Chungi conference here, the Cultural Tech Industry Conference. It's a great honor. Thank you so much. I have to tell you, this is my first time in Suwon. What a beautiful city. This is a fabulous place. You're very lucky to live here. Okay, so let me get started. Over the past few years, rapid advances in machine learning have created a new subfield of artificial intelligence, generative AI, or today, GAI. Now, GAI systems produce novel text and images and music and software by analyzing enormous collections of digitized materials. The first wave of GAIs are primarily focused on engaging in natural language conversation. These are called large language models, or LLMs. Now, they already exhibit an astonishing proficiency at a wide variety of tasks with superhuman performance. Now, to give you a feel for the remarkable power of these programs, I'd like to show you a few examples that I created for this conference. Now, here is just the beginning of what GPT-4, which is an LLM, said when I asked it what I should talk about today. And as you can see, it made a number of helpful questions. And I actually did use and incorporate it into my talk. But LLMs are capable of much more than this simple example demonstrates. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about LLMs is their ability to produce creative works, including images, music, and poetry. Now, to demonstrate this, I asked GPT-4 to write a short poem about this conference. It instantly printed out what you see on this slide. At Suwon's hub, where minds convene, Chungi content sets the scene. Tech and art and dialogue in every hall and seminar log. From pixels bright to culture's might, in Suwon's glow we share the light. Chungi charts the course ahead, where futures, dreams, and past are wed. Whew. Now I understand that many of you may not be able to read English all that easily, so please take my word for it. This is pretty good poetry, and it's certainly creative. And I will tell you, it's much better than anything that I could write. Now I hope you see how amazing this is. The shocking thing is that no one programmed GPT-4 to do this. Quite simply, it's intelligent enough to figure this all out by itself. Now, until now, we didn't really think that computers were capable of such accomplishments. But the plain fact is that we were wrong. So, welcome to the future, where we will be surrounded by computers that are as smart or smarter than we are, and quite creative as well. Now, this is just a taste of how powerful generative LLMs can chat with users in plain language and solve a broad range of complex problems with ease. But soon, they're going to be able to provide expert medical care, dispense legal advice, draft documents, tutor our children, offer advice, conduct therapy, translate between languages, write computer programs, and manage our organizations and our infrastructure, and a lot more than just that. Now, a related class of GAIs generate visual images from simple descriptions that are really virtually indistinguishable from human artwork or from photographs. Now, this painting was created using a GAI named Midjourney, and it won a prestigious art contest. Still, other GAIs fabricate voices or compose music in the style of a given artist or musician. So, have we finally discovered the holy grail of AI, so-called artificial general intelligence, that is, machines that far exceed human intelligence. Now, AGI, not to be confused with GAI, has been a distant fantasy of generations of scientists, not to mention many science fiction movies and books, like this super intelligent HAL 9000 computer from the 1968 movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. Anybody seen that? I got one person, okay. Remarkably, the answer to this question, in my view, is a qualified yes. The technology underlying GAI is quite general, in the sense that these programs are capable of learning from any collection of data that can be gathered and prepared for processing. Now, that's a relatively straightforward task in the modern digital world. Previous AI systems, as powerful as they are, targeted specific applications, like recognizing faces or translating between languages. The new technology that powers generative AI can do all of these things, but with a single integrated program. So let's ask the question, is GAI artificial? Of course. Is it general? Yes. But is it intelligent? Surprisingly, I believe the answer is yes, once you understand how these remarkable programs work and what they are doing, which I will not have time to go into today. But with this as background, let's turn to what GAI is going to mean for the cultural and the creative industries. Now, since the dawn of the electronic age, computers have been regarded as cold and calculating, devoid of social graces and creativity. But as you've already seen, this is no longer true. AIs are now capable of performing many different kinds of creative tasks. So let's get to the important question for today. Are computers going to replace human painters and writers and musicians? Well, that depends. Some artists produce fine art. These artists express their life experiences in new and different ways through the works that allow us to enjoy and appreciate. Now, great art, such as what you see in galleries and museums and you hear in concert halls, really can't be done by a computer because computers don't experience the world in the way the humans do. Computers don't have the emotional and the psychological grounding to interpret the world in the way that a human artist can. Today's GAIs are also limited because they're trained not on real-world data, but on electronic data that's been generated by humans. And while that digital record reflects a lot of the structure of human activities, it's not the same as experiencing the world directly. So there's no way for a GAI to give us a truly new and unique artistic interpretation of our own world. So are the jobs of creative workers in the cultural industry safe? Fortunately, the answer is no, because not every creative worker is making fine art. Most do more common work, like producing brochures or writing product manuals or designing corporate logos. And whether we like it or not, GAI is going to dramatically alter the way such tasks are done. Many of these creative workers are going to lose their jobs because a GAI can do much of this work more quickly at lower cost than humans. But don't despair, that's not the end of the story. It'll be much more expensive and time-consuming to perform these tasks. The demand for such work is going to increase dramatically. And paradoxically, this will require more skilled and creative workers to manage and direct this work using GAI. And after a period of economic adjustment, there'll be plenty of work for people, but the nature of that work is about to change. Now, so far, I've been talking about big picture ideas, as you'd expect from an academic. But now I'd like to bring this down to earth with a couple of real-world examples. In the past few weeks, I've talked to two different people who lost their jobs to generative AI. One of them was a writer for a TV game show. Now, this particular show had contestants answer questions that were posed by a host. And most of the questions, frankly, were intended to get the players to reveal embarrassing facts about themselves or to make them seem poorly informed. Now, the producers of this low-end entertainment wanted to save money. And it turns out that paying a staff of writers to make up the questions was a significant portion of their budget. So what did they do? Of course, they tried using generative artificial intelligence. And they discovered that it could quickly generate lots of potential questions for free. All they needed was one head writer who could select and edit the questions generated by the computer program. So the other writers lost their jobs. But as I said before, that's not the end of the story. The producers were interested in franchising their show into different countries and different languages. And because their production costs were reduced, they were able to accelerate that expansion of their business. And of course, what this meant was they needed more head writers who were hired to use GAI to produce questions for the shows in other countries and in other languages. Let me give you another real-world example. The second person I talked to who lost their job to worked for a company that sold summaries of business news from multiple language sources to corporate clients. Now, his company decided to replace most of their multilingual business analysts, including him, with the GAI that generates news summaries automatically. And as you would expect, the computer could perform this work in a fraction of the time and at a far lower cost than the human workers could. But there was a problem. The quality of the computer-generated news summaries was much worse than the human-generated summaries. So what did the company do? They decided to change the structure of their business. Instead of offering just one service, they started a new division to offer a different service. The new service sold a low-cost product that included only computer-generated summaries. And many of their current clients decided to switch from the more expensive human-generated summaries to the less expensive computer-generated summaries. But because they could offer the new service at a much lower price, they expect to attract a lot more customers. And to meet that increased demand, they hope to hire new workers who can manage that process using generative artificial intelligence. So what should creative workers in these and similar industries do? One possible reaction is to go on strike and demand that companies limit their use of GAI or otherwise continue to pay their current workers. But history shows that's a losing battle. You may have heard that in the US, the TV and movie industry, the writers' union is on strike, making just such demands. But I will tell you the inside word that I have from friends in Hollywood is that the Hollywood writers are going to be settling their dispute very soon and returning to work with, frankly, very little to show for their efforts. The alternative, a better approach for today's creative workers, is to learn how to use generative AI to perform their jobs more quickly with less effort. Now, since it'll be much more productive, their skills will be valued by employers who will be able to pay them better, or many of these workers will be able to go into business for themselves. Now, you might think that all this turmoil is a new type of problem never seen before, created by a new technology. But this is not the case. In fact, this same pattern of job destruction and creation as a result of new technology has been going on for centuries, at least since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And that's because As amazing and novel as GAI is, in economic terms, it's simply a new wave of automation. And, like previous waves of automation, it puts some people out of work, but the increased productivity of the remaining workers quickly creates new demand and new types of jobs for workers. And the cultural industry is unique in many ways, but the plain fact is that automation has finally come for it, as it did in the past for farms and factories and many other industries. But here's a surprise. This isn't even the first time technology has upended the economics of creative workers. Now, when photography was invented in the mid-1800s, people immediately understood that it was a great alternative to hiring a painter to paint a family portrait. Instead of sitting for hours at great expense, a photographer could take a picture in minutes at a much lower cost. As you might expect, many portrait painters lost their jobs. But in terms of overall employment, the picture is not so bleak. Since just about everyone could afford to have a photographic portrait made of their family, the market for such services exploded. There was less demand for skilled painters, but a new and profitable art form, created a whole new class of jobs. But once again, that's not the whole story. At first, many people felt that photographers were little more than technicians. They just pressed a button on a camera while the camera did all the hard work of making a portrait. But it soon became obvious that making a good photograph was itself a creative skill, involving factors such as composition and lighting. I think it's fair to say that today, we regard photographers as artists, just as skilled as creative painters. A more recent example of this technology-driven transition is in animation. Before modern computers were available, making a feature-length cartoon animated film was a long and difficult and very expensive process, as each frame of the picture, called a cell, had to be drawn by hand. But when modern graphic workstations and the associated software tools were developed, one skilled graphic artist could do the work of an army of illustrator artists, hand-drawn artists, not to mention that the quality of the product improved dramatically. So what happened? The market for digitally produced animations exploded. And today, animated features are considered among the finest films made, and they represent a far larger share of the major motion pictures produced today than before this kind of technology was available. But are the digital graphic artists who program and operate the software less creative than their predecessors who worked only with pen and paper? I think not. Certainly, the people doing this work today at companies like Disney and Pixar and DreamWorks and Warner Brothers, they don't think they're less skilled artists. They just work in a different medium. And this is the pattern that I expect to see throughout the cultural industries. Some creative workers will lose their jobs, but some will learn the new skills required to make good use of generative artificial. Eventually, people will regard these new workers not as mere technicians, but as skilled artists in their own right. As the market for their work expands, employment is going to shift from the older style of work to the new style of work. Now, I'd like to turn to an issue that GAI-generated work raises. Can the output of these systems be copyrighted? At this point in time, I'm sorry to say that we're off in the wrong direction, at least in the United States. The US Copyright Office has decided that only human-generated works can be copyrighted. Now, I believe this is short-sighted and frankly, just plain wrong. Not to mention that such a policy is impossible to implement. Whether or not a writer or a visual artist uses GAI should not make a difference in whether the result is subject to copyright. And I think that eventually the US Copyright Office will change its view on this as it becomes clearer that the human creative effort has simply shifted from one form to another. Those artists who can use the new technology are going to soon be arguing that their efforts are no less creative or deserving of copyright protection than other artists. And I believe that public opinion is eventually going to shift to agree with them. Now, for a historical example of just such a transition, I'm going to return to my example of portrait painters versus photographers. When a market first emerged around 1850 for commercial portrait photography, the US Copyright Office initially ruled that photographs could not be copyrighted, using the same argument that is using today to dismiss GAI-generated art. And that was that they claimed the works were created by a machine and not by a human being. But then in 1884, a photographer named Napoleon Sarony sued the Barrow-Giles Lithographic Company for making and selling 85,000 unauthorized prints of this photograph of Irish author Oscar Wilde. Now, following this obvious injustice, new laws were passed that established the right of photographers to copyright their works. A similar chain of events occurred when it became possible to record music. Believe it or not, in the United States, it wasn't until 1974 that musical recordings were fully protected under US copyright law. I expect that a similar story will play out with GAI-generated content. Eventually, new laws will be written that permit GAI-generated works to be copyrighted by the person who prompted the program to generate those works. So, it is not yet clear whether the GAI technological revolution will be a net positive for society, though I expect it will be. But here's some of the problems GAI may cause specifically for the cultural industries. First and foremost, because it'll be so much easier to generate content using GAI, the internet and other communications channels are going to be flooded with low-quality computer pages, blog posts, marketing materials, images, articles, and even books will crowd out much more thoughtful human-generated works. Already, some authors are protesting that Amazon, this is an example, is listing computer-generated books that compete with their own works. Or even worse, believe it or not, some of these books are falsely claiming that they were written by the human author. Now, Amazon is struggling to develop a practical policy for detecting and prohibiting such works. Another problem generative AI creates for the cultural is that it's possible to train a GAI to closely mimic or copy the style of a particular writer or artist or musician. Even worse, it's possible to recreate the image of a particular person or actor so accurately that it's nearly impossible to tell you aren't seeing the real person. Anybody recognize the person on the right? I've frightened you all into submission. This problem, called deepfakes, is going to be a major issue for the cultural industry. I would have told you his name, but I forgot. Does anybody remember his name? Famous Tom Cruise, thank you. Okay, in Hollywood, actors are on strike today demanding new protections of their image, or at least a guarantee that they're going to be compensated appropriately for those works. Okay, now I'd like to return to the big picture, beyond the cultural industry. Now, if your head is spinning trying to digest all this information, you may be wondering what GAI is likely to mean for our future. What should we think about this new technology? Well, here's the way that I like to think about it. Until now, humans were the only things we know that exhibited general intelligence. But now we need to accept the inconvenient fact that this is no longer true. GAIs are computer programs, but there's no doubt that they are as intelligent as we are, and perhaps more so. But this doesn't mean that we've created some new form of life. GAIs don't have minds in the human sense. They don't harbor independent goals and desires and prejudices and aspirations and emotions and sensations. These uniquely human characteristics are essential to the creation of great art. And as I have explained, GAI-generated art isn't going to crowd out the works of human artists in our museums, and it isn't going to be performing in our concert halls. Scientists used to say that what distinguishes people from animals is our ability to use tools. Well, GAI is certainly amazing, and it's certainly a powerful tool. But in contrast to animals, GAI is universal because it's a tool that can use other tools. These systems are smart enough to consult other experts, to look things up, to run computer programs, and to learn new languages. Soon, they'll be able to drive our cars, plan and cook meals, clean houses and offices, and operate all sorts of machinery. And they'll be able to do many of the creative jobs at the core of today's cultural industry. Or at least, they'll be able to greatly assist in this process. But GAIs are much more than powerful tools. GAIs can not only use tools, they can invent new tools. In this sense, GAI is the ultimate invention, an invention that invents. It can discover new drugs and therapies. It can design better products, homes and factories. It can suggest ways to address climate change. It can help us to solve some of humanity's biggest challenges. It's clear that we are embarking on a new wave of rapid change and disruption. Generative AI will change just about everything. Today, I've discussed how it will impact the cultural industry, but you can be assured that this is just one of the ways in which it will change our lives. I encourage you to think of this not as a problem, but as an opportunity. I expect the GAI will make possible a whole new form of entertainment and art, just as the invention of the camera created photography and films. It will put some workers out of jobs, but it will employ more in ways that we can't even imagine today. Though generative AI will automate some of the work of today's creative artists, there's no need to worry that it will diminish or limit our spirit. As the English philosopher Bernard Williams said, "Man never made any material as resilient as the human spirit." Human ingenuity knows no bounds, and our unique imagination and creativity will always play a starring role in the future story of humanity. Thank you.